transiently in New York City for 3 months and commuting via plane for another 3, I finally had 1 solid month of consistency and routine in my own space. Until management forced everyone in my building, of course including me, to move with just 2.5 months notice. I'm Hava, and in this video, I'm continuing the story of how I got started in New York City by myself without a job and without a place to live. Over the course of 3 videos, I'm sharing the story of my first 12 months in New York City as part of a mini-series to celebrate my first anniversary of my adventure here. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2 of this story, you might want to go back to those videos now and hear about what led up to this point. If you want to continue, that's fine. Just know you're jumping in the middle of the story. On the other hand, if you come over from part 2, thank you so much for coming back and seeing the story through. Like with the other videos, in order to tell you the full story of what happened, I took notes on my computer, which turned into a word-for-word narrative, just so that I could remember all the details, and I'm going to be referencing and reading it throughout this video. Also, as a heads up, I'm going to be mentioning several brands throughout this video, and I want to let you know this video is not sponsored at all. I've just had some really great experiences with brands, and they were part of the story. To elaborate on what I stated at the beginning of the video to hook you in here, on March 14th, my co-living company notified me and everyone in my apartment, as well as the building, that they would not be continuing to work with the landlord, meaning our subleases would dissolve and that we had to move out with a strict deadline of May 31st. I've heard that 60 days notice is required by law or something, and if that's true, we were given just 2.5 weeks over that. But anyway, there was a lot of fishiness around the situation in general. I spent a lot of time on the phone with New York City help hotlines, lawyers, and others, and the way the lease and termination agreements were written up gives me very little room to speak on the situation publicly. Even though I won't be disclosing the name of the company, I'm still going to err on the side of caution and keep the rest of the details of the situation private as well. I'll just tell you that 1, according to my research and the team of lawyers one of my former roommates worked with, no, most likely this situation was not totally above board and the tenants could have won a court case. 2, that would have taken forever, and staying in this apartment waiting to be evicted was not a situation I wanted to be in. And 3, at some point, you just want to move on. It was a toxic situation. I spent a lot of time crying, both on and off the phone with people. The situation was excruciatingly frustrating. Oh, and by the way, the forced move came with no help. Only an offer for a $50 Uber or Lyft credit if you transferred to one of their other properties, which the only other property they even have in the city that meets my needs didn't have an availability at my price point. And believe me, I tried to figure something out. I even went to Bushwick one day to see what the neighborhood was like at a different one of their properties, but I knew it wasn't the right place for me. I also persistently tried to communicate with them, even though the only number they have is for emergency property issues like leaks and lockouts. Phone conversation was only one way, and the people I was trying to work with didn't always call back when they said they would, took forever to get back to me, and were overall just not helpful. So imagine my despair when I dropped a $20 application fee and a $175 enrollment fee. That's nearly $200 to reserve another decent looking apartment in Williamsburg after looking at options with a different company, because at this point, why would I want to stay with a company that screwed me like this anyway? Only for the place I was living at to tell me that they would not let me out of my lease for an April 8th move-in date. The incompetent person corresponding with me over the email even had the gall to ask, are you able to push the move-in date by a few weeks? Making it really obvious that she doesn't know New York City real estate at all. It seriously doesn't work like that. Or feigning ignorance, which is also bad if you have so many locations in New York. Well, let me tell you, apartment hunting in New York City is not easy. In fact, it can be downright tough, especially since they dumped us into the most expensive season to rent. Note that my lease was going to be up in January of 2023, the dead of winter when it's the least expensive to rent, and the market has been especially competitive this year. The standard $20 application fee for apartments here is never refundable, which I knew, but apparently the $175 enrollment fee for that other co-living company was non-refundable too, because their sales team had really strong, quick communication on everything except my inquiries about getting that money back. So I was out $200 and back at ground zero. At this point, I'd pretty much seen everything coming available for co-living spaces in the city, and nothing met my needs in my budget. That's when I turned to Facebook groups and Roomie, which is an app for finding rooms and roommates in New York City. I struggled to do anything besides apartment hunting because until I found a place, I felt like I was just sitting on a stick of dynamite like in Tom and Jerry. There were so many Facebook groups. I joined Facebook groups by neighborhood or based on what people were looking for, and some groups had posts of places and others were for finding potential roommates to search with. I really mainly just wanted to find a room to fill because the stickiness and headache that could come from searching with people I don't really know, especially with my time predicament, made me nervous. But I did start corresponding with a couple people about it until I found a room posted in a Facebook group that had so much interest, I figured it would be a long shot, but I threw my name in and started a conversation anyway. To my surprise, the poster said there had been a lot of interest but no serious potential in candidates yet. We had a brief phone call on Tuesday, April 12th. I used my calendar and past emails to help me remember the timing of everything. And then I arranged to meet her at the building the next morning for a tour. The move-in date was May 1st. With the hours I had between the two interactions, I hurriedly got my ducks in a row. Like I said in part 2 of this video, being self-employed means I don't have typical proof of income requested, such as pay stubs. Instead, I researched online what documentation people use in my situation and how to make an application stand out. Although this application turned out to be online, I didn't know that until later, so I organized my documents, walked to the library, and printed everything out. This included bank statements, my 2020 tax return, my credit report, and other things I don't remember right now, and a cover letter. I read that a cover letter can make an app really stand out. The apartment was in a luxury high-rise building near the Empire State Building and Macy's Herald Square, the flagship of Macy's and the largest retail store in America. I've got a video coming to this channel all about it, so once it's up, you'll be able to click here and see it. Until then, make sure you subscribe and have notifications turned on so that you'll see when it does come in. For the sake of keeping the story clear from here forward, I'm going to refer to it as the Midtown Place. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom turned into a 3-bedroom by turning the living room into 2 tiny bedrooms by installing what's known as flex walls. Flex walls are temporary walls installed with the use of pressure to create a private space. I was looking at the true bedroom with a closet and about as much square feet as the room I was coming from. So click here for a tour of my first New York City apartment. Because the building was formerly a hotel, the room didn't have any overhead lighting, so I was thinking about how to make the place bright since light's very important for my mental health. The window in the room did get some good light though, and the girls living there told me that it overlooks the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, which is really neat. It had a dishwasher and a questionably working oven that they used for extra storage, but they said I could get management to fix it if it wasn't working since they weren't sure. The kitchen had very limited storage space and the appliances were outdated, but I figured I could make do. Laundry was in the building, though I don't remember if it was on the same floor or not, and washers, dryers cost about $3.25 to $3.75 per load. The room was available on the 7th floor of the building, and upstairs there was a lounge and a rooftop, and they were incredible. They had amazing views and light. I remember telling my aunt on the phone later that I had a really strong feeling about this place. It just felt like it was the one. What I didn't understand was that my strong feeling wasn't specifically about that apartment, it was about stepping up to live in a luxury building. And don't get me wrong, I loved my previous apartment. I wasn't only upset because I had to deal with the hassle and time loss of moving, starting over in a sense, and incur the financial blow. I was actually really sad to leave the home I'd started creating. I had a really great situation. Again, click the link in the description below to see a tour of that apartment. I enjoyed luxuries such as a dishwasher and laundry in unit, but it was by no means a luxury building. And about this feeling, I didn't feel that way about the place I put $200 down for. Holding that apartment came from a place of scarcity and not wanting to lose what might be my only good option because of waiting. Losing an apartment from waiting too long is a very common experience here in New York City. A lot of times you have to be ready right away because if you're looking at something really good, you're literally racing the other applicants to be the first one. I even walked over to that place that I put money down for right before doing that, and I stood outside the building feeling very unsure. A drawback of co-living spaces is that tours aren't guaranteed. It depends on the company. Some don't do them at all, and most won't do them if someone is living there, maybe unless their lease is almost up. So this is why I went to look at the building from the outside, kind of like I did with the first place I ended up in. It felt like it was such a step down from the wonderful south side of Williamsburg that I'd come to love. Williamsburg is a very large neighborhood, and this apartment was on the east side. I came to the conclusion that I needed to start the process with it because the closer to my deadline I got, the fewer options would be available, at least when I was looking only at co-living spaces. Anyway, so I found this awesome luxury building in the heart of Midtown and I jumped on the opportunity. Though, as urgent as I felt about the situation, their leasing office didn't feel quite the same level of hurry, especially being flooded with other applications for the building apparently, which makes sense, very busy time of year. While I was waiting, which felt like forever, but we're talking about a matter of days here, I got a response from someone on Roomy. Remember Roomy? Earlier, I mentioned this app that helps people find rooms and roommates. I reached out to several potential options on the app, but the couple chats hadn't worked out and most of my messages didn't receive replies at all. Until, of course, I had an active application going with the Midtown place. I got a delayed response from someone I'd reached out to, and her place was even better than the spot I just put an app in for. We're talking 2 walls of windows and a room big enough to work as a bedroom, an apartment, and even some space to exercise. An apartment with a dishwasher, an in-unit washer dryer, modern appliances, and aesthetically pleasing finishes like marble-like countertops and wood-looking cabinets in the kitchen. A totally different neighborhood, but still very accessible in terms of commuting to the subway. Another luxury building with a gym, lounge, outdoor rooftop areas upstairs, even if not some of the same stunning views as the heart of Midtown offered. Did I mention that this room would cost less than the Midtown apartment and less than what I was paying at my last apartment? This specific unit I put in an application for was at the top of my budget and not rent controlled, so when the lease would come up for a 12-month renewal in October, the cost would likely skyrocket to meet the current market value, outpricing me and causing turbulence in my life all over again because I'd probably have to move. I'm pretty sure it was a good deal due to pandemic pricing. This new unit I discovered was rent stabilized, meaning the building would only increase the price of rent by a small percentage when it comes up for lease renewal in September. This apartment would also come with 3 female roommates who made it a requirement to meet me first. Of course, that's a good thing. Ideally, you really do want to know who you're going to be living with. The afternoon the girl and I started messaging on the app, which quickly turned into a FaceTime, was Thursday, April 14th. The move-in date was May 1st. On our FaceTime, I offered to come tour the apartment and meet the roommates that night. I didn't know how much time I had, but I knew I was on the clock now to get this figured out before hearing back from the Midtown place. The roommates were all already busy, so I even offered to get up to meet them at the crack of dawn the next morning, which was a Friday, before they went to work and before I got on a bus to head to DC for the weekend. When that wasn't an option, I even offered to FaceTime if they had any time during the weekend. When that didn't work either, we made arrangements for me to come to the apartment Monday night to meet 2 of the roommates, and then I FaceTimed the last one since she was out of town. Over the weekend, however, I submitted an online application to the building. I risked $20 non-refundable dollars applying to the building because if the girls decided I was a no-go, that money would be gone. If you're keeping score, at this point I dropped $215 on apartment hunting, not to mention the hours upon hours over the course of several days. So on the surface, putting down another $20 doesn't look appealing at all. I think I was also a bit desensitized at this point, but more than that, I just had to go for it. People always ask, what's the worst that can happen? Or what if the girls don't think you're a fit for the apartment? But I've learned from various authors and speakers and then from my own experience that it's important to flip those questions on their heads and ask what's the best that can happen and what if it does work out? So if it did work out among the girls, the process with the building would already be in motion, theoretically, speeding up their response time since Monday during the day, the building would have my information to review while I waited for my meeting with my potential roommates. Because remember, I was sitting on the edge of my seat. I was praying that the other building would wait to get back to me. The longer the ball stayed in their court, the longer I had to get through the process with this better apartment. I knew once the ball was back in my court, there would be high pressure from the other potential roommates at the Midtown place for me to sign right away. Somehow, I needed to get all the way to acceptance with this new discovery before the other one even got back to me. The housing market in New York City moves so fast that I honestly wonder if New York City has the fastest moving housing market in the world. I rearranged tutoring sessions in order to visit the apartment that Monday night. The girls seemed nice, and the tour around the apartment and building confirmed that the place was as good as the pictures I saw on Roomy. Still needing to meet the last roommate, she and I arranged a FaceTime for the following evening, Tuesday night. So I continued to pray that I wouldn't hear back from the Midtown place. But at this point, Tuesday, April 19th, with the nudging of the girls I was working with at the Midtown place, it had already been almost a week since we put our apps in, we heard back from their leasing office. Another girl was applying for one of the flex rooms at the same time, and the email we received stated that they had only approved us for the occupant status, meaning no negotiation rights upon renewal in October because I'd have to trust someone else, someone I hadn't met by the way, whose name would be on the lease. Even though I had confidence that I could figure out how to gain tenant status after I discovered why tenant status was originally declined, I saw this backup option as nothing to rush, just to keep the ball rolling as slowly as possible, which, keep in mind, we're operating on New York City time, which means a lot is happening in a much more compact period of time than you might expect. What I'm saying is, keeping the ball rolling slowly on New York real estate is not actually slow. Because I hadn't heard back from my first choice building at this point, 3 days after my Saturday online application, which translates to 2 business days, I decided to use that amazingly organized packet of printed documentation that I originally created but didn't end up needing for the Midtown Police to boost my chances of being approved for this apartment. I simply changed the name of the building I addressed on the cover letter. First thing Wednesday morning, I went to the leasing office of my first choice, sat down with someone, and presented my documentation, explaining how my income works and providing proof that I could and would pay rent. And by the way, this is when I realized that the $200 I dropped on my very first app wasn't a total waste. I used it as proof in my presentation of documents to help me with my approval by showing that another place had recently approved me. As I'm reflecting on this, I'm realizing that what I did was actually pretty unique, so let me know if you'd like me to make a video explaining how to get approved for an apartment in New York City when you don't have a traditional job with pay stubs, or if you just want to know what I did, because that's pretty much what the video would be. So after presenting my documentation, and note that I presented it, I haven't repeated the word present by accident. I walked in with casual confidence, explained what everything was and why each document was relevant to their approval. Then she entered a few things in her computer, and she said that she didn't think there would be any issue, but that she would confirm once she ran through the system. I'm sure there are standard checks they do, but there's definitely something to be said about the human element. The fact is, in the end, the people working in that office hold the power to approve or reject my application. So coming in and showing them what they wouldn't get from a limited online application, both documents and my professional organized approach, was very important. The same day, an in-person meeting was arranged to discuss the Midtown Place situation, and I was phoned in. It was helpful to hear the property manager explain everything, including the possibility of my reconsideration for tenant status. However, I was biding my time for a response from my first choice and hoping it would happen ASAP because obviously I wanted some relief. Even though it may not sound like long to you, this was several days of anticipation and adrenaline and anxiety, and those kind of days feel long. But more than that, I wanted to let these girls know to start looking for someone else, but I needed to have the possibility open until I knew for sure that I secured my first choice. On that note, it turned out that the leasing office of my first choice needed resubmission of documentation from all of the other roommates as well, and luckily everyone was prompt enough that on Thursday, April 21st, around 2 p.m., an email came in from the leasing office stating the approval. I also received an email with the documents to sign in order to make the lease takeover official. Speaking of which, this would be a great time to note that this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to fill the room someone was vacating in an apartment so that I wouldn't have to search for roommates and find a place we all agree on. In many cases, that means sliding into a lease takeover situation, which means someone is leaving in the middle of their lease, so they need someone else to come in and officially join the lease in their place and take over the rent payments. When all this was going on, I read that while this is a process that isn't difficult or time-consuming on the landlord side, it's become a place where they found they can make more money on tenants. It's not uncommon to have to pay an amendment fee of $250 to $1,000, and unfortunately, the fee for my building is at that $1,000 mark. And I was responsible for the whole thing. Even though I asked the girl I was replacing if she would be willing to split that fee with me, everyone's gut reaction to that news was, that doesn't seem fair. She's partly responsible for the situation of leaving the middle of the lease, so shouldn't she at least pay half? In a perfect world, wouldn't include this fee, yes. But New York City is no perfect world, despite how much fun you see me having in Havas, New York. My show about the sights and things to do here in New York City. Click the link in the description below at the end of this video to see what that's all about and new releases if you're an active viewer of the show. The fact is that in this market, at this good a rent price for what you get, she wouldn't have a hard time finding someone to pay for it. So I had to decide whether it was going to be me or someone else. I also asked the building to come down on that fee, but they said it was firm. I realized that in the email Thursday, I did not have the lease to accompany the DocuSign, so I reached out and asked for a copy of the lease because always read your contracts. The lease came in within hours of my parents' arrival to New York City. They came to visit for my birthday weekend, but more on that later. So I had to take out 45 minutes of my time with them to read this contract and sign the document. Though it was definitely cool to make it official with my parents there and then take them to see the new building right afterwards. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I still had to wait for the other roommates to sign the document. Until I, the girl I was replacing, and all the other roommates signed, it technically wasn't official, but I decided that at this point it was okay to go ahead and reach out to the group I'd been working with at the Midtown Place. Keep in mind, it had only been 2 days since the meeting about occupancy versus tenant status, but in New York City at this point, knowing I was going a different direction, I felt like it was courteous to let them know I would not be moving forward with them. Everyone I worked with was really nice. I made me emails short and sweet, and even though it was my second choice for a multitude of reasons, as you know from all the details I've shared already, the occupancy hang-up gave me an easy out. Speaking of getting out, remember how the co-living place where I lived said they wouldn't let me leave for an April 8th moving date? I just took you through about a week and a half of time solely focused on the storylines of the 2 apartments I was pursuing. In the midst of it all, April 13th, the manager at the co-living company who'd previously trapped me into staying with their company longer had the gall to reach out and ask if I'd be pursuing a new apartment and terminate in the next few weeks. Honestly, the nerve. I can't be totally sure where this email came from other than nearly 2 weeks of silence from me on the heels of my clearly letting them know that I was in communication with legal entities. But in any case, I reminded her that they forced me to lose out on another opportunity because they would not release me from the lease that they were truly the ones terminating, and I couldn't afford to pay for 2 places at once. I told her I would continue looking but would not provide exact dates until I could secure something. When I reached out on April 27th, she wrote up a termination agreement promptly, and I think we were both very happy to be done communicating with each other. And in case you've forgotten the last minute-ness of it all, moving day was May 1st. I hope you've been able to keep up with all this. So much happened simultaneously that it wasn't easy to explain. Plus, keeping the names of all 4 companies private, it was tricky to make sure everything came out clearly for you to follow. To alleviate any extra confusion around the apartment hunt, I decided to wait until after I finished that explanation to tell you about the other things that happened during this time period. So let's rewind a bit to talk about that now. My boyfriend and I are in a long-distance relationship. Sam lives in New Mexico, so when he was given the opportunity to work in DC for about 3 weeks, we were very excited about the prospect of seeing each other. DC and New York City are not super close to each other, but much closer than New York and New Mexico. After his first week in DC, he took a bus up to New York and we enjoyed a weekend here together. In case you're following along with the dates, this would be April 8th to 10th. I was really excited because he agreed to join me for an episode of Havas New York that I was already planning to film that weekend before we knew about the business trip, exploring a Yankee Stadium during a Yankees-Red Sox baseball game. So I bought 2 tickets, and originally I was going to attend the game Sunday, April 10th by myself, which started at 7 p.m., so I accidentally purchased tickets for that date. Luckily, I realized my error shortly after the purchase because by then, Sam would be on a bus back to DC. I used SeatGeek to book the tickets, and they made it really easy to change the tickets to Saturday options without a headache or a penalty. I got us decent seats, of course, because while I wouldn't necessarily treat myself to that view, no way am I gonna give my viewers nosebleed tickets. We were both stoked. We totally didn't mind setting aside our Houston Astro roots for this experience because we love baseball and this is absolutely iconic. We timed everything right to get to the stadium about an hour before the game began, and I started taking my intro shots. After a few minutes, Sam realized that it sounded really active and he looked up the game. We weren't an hour early. We were 2 hours late. I messed up and didn't mentally register the new start time on the Saturday game being 4, unlike the 7 p.m. start time of the Sunday game. We were crushed, and I was horribly embarrassed too. I don't make these kinds of mistakes. It's just not my way. I continued to take some clips in case I could piece together a video somehow, but I was very sad, and when the camera was off, I did let out some tears. I had trouble forgiving myself, and I'm honestly still feeling regret over it. I think I'll feel better once I can take us on that date again in the future and do it right. I'm pretty sure this was the most expensive date we'd ever booked, and a really unique experience, and I blew it. I mean, we hurried to our seats and made the most of the time we had left, but arriving in the 6th inning doesn't leave a lot of game left. It was a 2-4 Yankees win, and the subway was electric afterwards. I wish I had some clips to show you, but I lost them. Pinstripes were crowded together in the car, chanting and cheering for the Yankees, and then everyone started singing classics like Journey and Billy Joel. It was one of those moments you just always remember. Having Sam come around this time was really good. It followed a lot of the time I'd spent dealing with the co-living companies, legal entities, and intense stress. I even remember before he came saying how long it had been, a month and a half, since another human had hugged me, and I really needed it. Plus, I hadn't yet discovered either apartment I just told you about, let alone started the processes, so it was probably good to have some support before I got into all that. Aside from the game, we were just happy to spend some chill time hanging out together. We watched Friends, we were both watching it for the first time together and loving it, and we explored the restaurant scene. Eating out at restaurants was especially exciting for me because right now, my budget doesn't give me room to explore the restaurant scene. And those are fancy words for I cannot currently afford to eat out. I cook all my meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 7 days a week. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful that I can afford to buy groceries even though I take the subway to Target and or Trader Joe's to do so to get to an affordable grocery store. Because when you see homelessness in New York City, let it be a reminder to be grateful. And I keep gratitude on my mind all the time with this Little Words Project bracelet that I got. That being said, I do still carefully regulate my thoughts as it relates to my desire to eat out because I'm surrounded by amazing restaurants. This is New York City. City. And I'd love to eat out every day if I could. It would be neat to explore the many amazing cuisines and restaurants here, but that's on the back burner right now because I'm investing my money into places that give me a greater return to be able to live out that restaurant dream in the future. If that sounds a little off topic, it's actually not, because remember, I'm covering the story and the experience of my first year here, and I wanted to share that information about my lifestyle because when people tell me I'm living the dream, I feel like they can't see the full picture. Yes, absolutely, I'm living part of my dream, and some of the very visible parts of my dream are in motion. But the people who make these proclamations don't necessarily understand that I have a life that includes no dining out, and that's one of the huge appeals about New York for people. In fact, I've gotten several requests to create content around the cuisine scene and restaurants here. So just remember in general that you never have the full story. But that being said, I do love the life I'm creating for myself, and I am excited to be able to grow my food budget as my income grows. The restaurants we ate at when Sam visited were Teresa North 9th, a Mediterranean Balkan restaurant on Bedford, which is the main drag in Williamsburg, Extra Virgin, which is an Italian French Mediterranean restaurant in the West Village, Lusardi's, which is an Italian restaurant in the Upper East Side, and Sundays in Brooklyn in Williamsburg. The next weekend, April 15th to 17th, I took a bus down to DC. The strange thing is that the bus said it was non-stop, but we made several stops along the way. This, along with getting out of town a little late, caused my arrival to be 2 hours later than scheduled, which for a 4-hour ride is significant, especially on a Friday afternoon. And on that note, Sam and I used a convenient search tool, kind of like Expedia or Kayak, but for buses and trains, to find the most affordable fares to commute. But we learned something the hard way. It's very important to stick with certain bus companies. Otherwise, you'll end up on a bus that says it's nonstop when it really isn't. This happened to us on 2 of the 3 companies we used, and it was a huge time waster. The 3rd company we used was Washington Deluxe, and it was by far the best experience we had. Everyone was professional, we departed on time, and it was truly non-stop. Just wanted to give you this warning before you start taking buses around the country. Oh, and if you're wondering why we didn't just take the train, it was a financial decision. The train tickets were plane ticket level in cost, and we later learned from someone my boyfriend works with that if purchasing far ahead, the train tickets can be more affordable, but overall the buses are cheaper. And if truly non-stop, only about an hour longer in commute time. So I took this bus to DC, and when it finally dropped me off at the Shell gas station where it said it would, I was so excited to be out, to stretch my legs and see Sam. I walked across the street to the DC Metro bus stop. I decided to take public transportation so that Sam could avoid rush hour traffic that was beginning due to my late arrival. And about 10 minutes after the bus I had taken from New York drove away, I realized I was missing something. The suitcase I had put in the storage compartment under the bus when I boarded it. I immediately called the bus company and sat on hold waiting for service. Meanwhile, after standing at this public bus stop for over 20 minutes and waiting for 2 buses that never showed up, I realized that I was gonna have to walk about a half hour to get to the nearest metro station. The silver lining is that it was a beautiful walk across the Whitney Young Memorial Bridge and through the areas with RFK Fields and Stadium. Once someone from the bus company answered my call, she gave me a number to call a line for Lost and Found. The Lost and Found line didn't work, so I called back and spoke to the same woman again. She got all my information down, and then I focused on figuring out how to get to Sam. I took the metro to Old Town Alexandria, where he was staying, and we went to Walmart to get me a couple pairs of underwear. Before I continue the story, I want to take a minute to talk about the phrase can't handle it. I've never been one to really say it until this series of unfortunate events. The thing is, when a person says, I can't handle it, in most cases, they don't mean that they're gonna die. So what does it mean? I learned that not being able to handle it means you can't keep up with everything being thrown at you, so you drop the ball. Messing up at the Yankees game the previous weekend, like I said, so unlike me. Forgetting a suitcase on a bus, even more unlike me. But the fact is, everyone has their limits. I had too much to keep up with. Remember, this is the weekend where I had active applications for 2 great apartments, too much stress, and too many challenges leading up to this point. I remember telling Sam on the phone as I walked to the metro station, I'm really doing my best, and I know I look fine on the outside, but I'm really not fine. I feel like given my reputation, this could come as a surprise to many of you watching this, and I'm talking about people who know me not only through the internet, but also people who know me in real life. Of course, knowing me and everything I've been going through better than almost anyone, his response was, I know. Eventually I made it, and after setting my stuff down in his hotel room, just my backpack, we headed out to wander Old Town Alexandria and find something appealing for dinner. We ate at the Chart House because I could order a reasonably priced mocktail, and I've been wanting something like that since I'm not allowed to drink alcohol while I'm on Accutane. Saturday morning, Sam went to work for a few hours, and then we headed to DC, where we ate lunch with my aunt and uncle, some of my favorite people, at Founding Farmers, a rustic chic American restaurant where I would love to go again. Then the four of us leisurely made our way to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where we enjoyed exhibits and talk time for a couple hours. When Sam and I got back to Old Town, we honestly had a pretty bad experience with the restaurant we chose for dinner, and I don't feel like going over it, but we did get an order of Smith Island cake to go, and this was really neat because the countless times I visited Maryland growing up, this was actually the first time I'd ever tasted the state dessert of Maryland. The next morning, we walked to Fontaine, a lovely spot for brunch, and after walking around Old Town, we went back to try one of their dessert crepes. And that afternoon, Sam dropped me off at Union Station to take the bus back to New York City. Side note, the fact that Washington Deluxe's location was the Union Station parking garage and that the other company's drop-off spot was a random Shell gas station.
So random, they just left us off at this random Shell gas station.
Should say it all in terms of picking a good bus company. I felt sad. Saying goodbye is always hard, and we just come off a tough conversation too. I rode the bus back and appreciated the adventure of the Lincoln Tunnel when I got back to the city, because I love tunnels. The next day, I called the bus company again where I had lost my suitcase. I spoke with the Lost and Found team, and they said they spoke to their bus driver, and I even tried to push them to reach out to the company where they get their buses from. Nothing. They told me I could go to the storefront in New York, and when I did, there were a few suitcases lying around, but none of them were mine. When I tried to speak with the woman working the counter there, she was rude and had a very get out of my face attitude. Forget the fact that I had trouble understanding her through her thick accent. I went back outside and made more calls to the company, but things were starting to look really bleak. It was starting to become apparent to both me and the person I'd been speaking with most times on the phone that somewhere along the way, this bag had been stolen. I calculated that my loss was worth about $1,000 in replacement costs. And you know, I was already stomaching a lot of unexpected expenses due to my unexpected upcoming move, which, by the way, at this point, I still had no idea where I would be. I just stood on the sidewalk out in front and started crying, and then sobbing, and I just stood there crying, mouth wide open, head tilted back level of crying. At one point, I knelt down because I just needed off my feet. Honestly, I couldn't be unsane. By the way, some people consider crying in public to be a rite of passage here. Even though I didn't mention it earlier in this series of videos, this isn't the first time I've cried in public in New York City, but this was the first time I made such a scene. It wasn't loud and it wasn't a busy street, but I think it would have been impossible to not notice me. The rude woman working the counter turned out to have a heart or guilt or something, because after several minutes, she came outside and had me come in to get more information about my itinerary. She made him call and spoke to the person on the other line in her native tongue, and then she took my information down. Then I left for real. This is when I was sure that I would never see that suitcase again, including clothes, some of Sam's clothes, a clean load of laundry that wasn't dry from his time in New York City the previous weekend, toiletry, that stuff really adds up, my Sonicare electric toothbrush, my straightener, my makeup bag, which makeup can be pricey, and I invest in clean makeup because I've had a lot of acne issues, which I've alluded to by mentioning the fact I'm on Accutane. You know about all the apartment stuff that happened throughout the rest of the week, and what's gone unsaid throughout this video is that, of course, I was juggling my tutoring business at the same time. That Friday, April 22nd, was the day I officially signed the lease for my new place, where I am now. That's the day my parents came to town, and it was also my 25th birthday. They brought me an old suitcase of mine filled with some extra stuff I had in Houston, such as a hairbrush. And I got to show them my first apartment in the nick of time, since I'd be moving less than a week after they left. I think it worked out that my parents came because I had my support system around me again. After all, the lease was signed, but the move was far from over. That said, I excitedly took a weekend off. I mean, truly off. No work of any kind. I hardly even logged on to social media. I didn't take a million photos. I just needed the time to mentally relax and savor the time with my parents. My parents coming to town was like taking a trip to New York City, even though I already live here. It's different living here day to day than coming on a trip. We did all kinds of sightseeing and New York activities, especially because my parents were, for all intents and purposes, first timers. New York pizza slices, riding the subway, Wall Street, Battery Park, the World Trade Center, the 9/11 Memorial, walking through neighborhoods until we found a little place to eat in the West Village, the Friends apartment, Washington Square Arch in Washington Square Park, Times Square, Rockefeller Center, Top of the Rock, Blue Bottle Coffee, Radio City Music Hall, the MLB store, Central Park, which my parents especially love, eating at the Low Boathouse, Dominique Ansel Bakery, a funky gelato place we found just east of Soho, The Butcher's Daughter, which is a restaurant I really like in New York City, and Katz's Deli, which is a famous Jewish deli, also known for a famous scene in When Harry Met Sally. And a major highlight for me is that after we decided decided to save the Bronx Zoo for their next visit, we somewhat spontaneously decided to see what shows the tickets booth might have available for that day. I really wanted to see Jersey Boys. It had been at the top of my list for a while, and the day before, I found out that the show would be closing in less than a month. We didn't see it posted on the sign for shows that day, and we didn't see another one we were as compelled to see. Just as we were off to the side regrouping, the electric sign flipped to the next page of the list again, and I spotted it for the first time, despite the fact that my parents and I had been standing there reading it for a few minutes already. I guess the universe sometimes works in the 11th hour. We went up to the booth and bought the tickets, and I think the woman in the booth gave us an extra discount because we were friendly.
I don't need your autograph, baby. It's all good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we got to the New World Stages Theater, we discovered that our seats were literally just chairs pulled up right behind the back row. So when tall people sat down in front of us, my mom and I tried to change our tickets at the box office, and we discovered that they don't do that. But the house manager was really cool, and he gave us a heads up about the possibility of changing our seats right before the show, since there would likely be a lot of vacancies. So we ended up in seats worth about $100 each, sitting middle center. Jersey Boys was even better than I could have imagined. I felt so inspired watching it, both to follow my dreams and that little tug I often get when I'm watching live theater that I want to be up on stage too. The music was incredible, and I happened to sit next to someone taking notes throughout the show. At intermission, I asked him if he was a student, a critic, etc., and he explained that he's the music director of the show, so once a week he sits in the audience to review the work to give feedback. I was sitting next to Ben Hartman. What are the odds? Sitting next to someone who has such a major role in the production was amazing to me, and getting to hear about his work during intermission was so much more fun than a bathroom break, which is what most people do during intermission. As you can tell, this was a really special trip for me. It was cool for me to be able to share this magical place with my parents, and we had some very meaningful conversations. My parents believe in me, and it truly means the world to me. One night over the weekend, I even cried of gratitude as I fell asleep for the amazingly supportive friends I have as parents. I was also happily surprised by just how much they loved New York City. I thought they would like it, but it's very different than my parents' usual choice of travel, so I'm really glad that they are excited to come back to visit me and the city. While my parents were here, of course we discussed the moving situation. To save money, when I'd already spent so much unplanned for, at first I thought I'd rent a car for 24 hours and make trips to move myself, but the reality of doing that was pretty risky. I didn't have anyone to help me move, so I'd have to put a sign in the window explaining my situation and hoping that I wouldn't get a ticket. And that's after I'd find places to legally park the car. Then think about all the trips to move everything alone. After talking it through, it was clear that this plan probably wouldn't work out, so I weighed my options to see if I could fly Sam to New York to help me or hire movers. When I did the research, the movers would cost less than a plane ticket would have, so that's what I decided to go with. In the end, my total including tip came out to around $375, and let me tell you, worth every penny. And that's coming from someone who is prepared to roll up her sleeves and DIY it to save money. I found two companies that looked great, but because of availability, one became the obvious choice, and I cannot rave enough about Piece of Cake Movers. If you're in New York City, you'll recognize their vehicles because they're the bright, hot pink cars and trucks. Throughout the entire process, every person I interacted with from the company, from the sales rep to the movers themselves, were communicative, professional, and timely. This video isn't sponsored by Piece of Cake, but it should be, and I wish it was, because I didn't know the process could be so easy and seamless. To avoid any extra expenses, I packed my stuff myself in duffel bags, reusable grocery bags, and trash bags, which my point of communication said would be acceptable the couple days leading up to May 1st. Also, during those last couple days, I faced the challenge of getting rid of my desk. I really loved this IKEA Malm desk, and it served me well. It was pretty new, but it was also huge, and I was going from a very large room to a much more modest size, so I knew it wasn't going to work out in my new place. In case I haven't said it already, for my new room, I bought the furniture off the previous tenant, and this was really convenient because it all fit just right and it's a style I like. Even though I could use the money, the fact is I didn't have the time or energy to deal with selling the desk, and believe it or not, donating things like this, and anything really, can be hard in New York City, which is why sometimes you'll notice perfectly good stuff sitting by the curb for trash day. I couldn't let that be the fate of my wonderful desk. Back in November, I even paid someone from TaskRabbit to assemble it. I called every charitable organization I could that claimed to take furniture, and even tried some local schools. Some places could take it, but not by my very tight deadline. A couple of people expressed interest but fell through, so I was thrilled that in the end, one of my former roommates wanted it. He's starting his first year of teaching next year, so I don't know if it's for his new classroom or his next apartment, but he was always nice, so I'm glad I was able to give it to him. When the two movers arrived the day of the move, I didn't exactly understand what I had done wrong in my packing, but one of the movers quickly figured out that I was a lone girl on a tight budget, so whatever it was, he said he'd take care of it free of charge. Maybe it helped that the amount of stuff I had for them to move was way under the amount I was paying for, since there's a minimum fee for a job, and even though I felt like it was a lot of stuff, and I got rid of some stuff later after I'd moved in, they said it was nothing. But at the same time, these movers were incredible, and he did something later that leads me to believe that they're just top-notch and kind. But for now, I'm gonna take you back to the morning of moving day. The movers weren't scheduled until the evening. That's a way to bring down the cost of movers. So after packing up my bedding, I went over to my new place around 10 a.m. to get my keys. For some reason, it hadn't occurred to me that I would need to clean, so I was surprised when I got there and realized I needed to spend a few hours deep cleaning my room. I went to a nearby convenience store and picked up supplies. First, I vacuumed, and then I wiped down everything with multi-purpose cleaner or water, depending on the item. Like I mentioned, the last place I lived was already furnished, so since I bought the lighting and furniture off the girl who lived here before me, it was present and ready for me to clean when I walked in. I wiped down everything from the lamps to the furniture to the windowsills, baseboards, and even the floor. Once I got into it, I also realized how glad I was to have the opportunity to clean before all my stuff crowded the room. I worked quickly, but it was a lot, and I remember my back hurt really bad after a while. The room needed a good deep cleaning anyway, but I also like to deep clean a place when I move in, so that after I know any dirt or uncleanliness that builds up is from me. And I don't know, there's something about cleaning a place that makes it feel fresh and new to me. Like I get to break it in now and make it mine. I guess that's kind of an energetic perspective, but it's the way I feel when I move into a new place. Going back to the great service of the Piece of Cake Moving Company, the movers called me, letting me know that they were ready and could come as much as 2 hours early if I wanted. Keep in mind, I chose the 6 to 9 p.m. time slot, meaning they could arrive at my old apartment anytime between 6 and 9 p.m. just to get started, which is why it was a less expensive option. I wasn't ready when they called me, but we agreed to meet at 6. I'd basically eaten nothing all day at this point, so after the physical labor and back and forth between apartments, when I got back to Williamsburg, I stopped at this lovely little spot on Haven Mayor called Little Chalk Apothecary and got an acai bowl to go. I got halfway through it before the movers showed up. They even arrived 10 minutes early. Again, so professional. Seeing my stuff all piled together reminded me that I'm not an extreme minimalist, even if I strive to embody some of the principles. It looked like so much stuff. Like I said earlier, the movers thought it was nothing. I expected my stuff would fill the van, but when they were done loading, it barely took up any space. After doing so much work that day and the days prior, it was honestly so nice to just stand back as they did all the heavy lifting and trips up and down stairs. Remember, I lived on the 2nd floor of a walk-up building. These movers were friendly, careful, and fast, and I could totally trust them with my stuff. Because according to the map, the time a Lyft or Uber would take to get me to my new apartment was about the same amount of time as the subway would take, I opted to save the money and meet them there with my free option. I mean, technically it's not free because I pay $127 a month for an unlimited Metro card, but it was already paid for. Plus, it's not like I had a lot to carry. All I had with me were my valuables, a couple other items in my North Face backpack, my Longchamp purse, and a reusable tote. So not nothing, but I didn't need the assistance of a car. As soon as I said, "See you there," to the movers, I booked it to the subway station. I wanted to beat them to my new building, but honestly doubted I was gonna get there first, but I had to try and at least get there within a couple minutes of them. The great news is I actually did beat them there. I was out of breath from running, but when I was across the street, I got a phone call from one of the gentlemen letting me know that they hit some traffic and they gave me an updated ETA. Again, I was really impressed with the professionalism. When they did arrive, they knew exactly what to do. I lucked out that one of the guys had so much experience that he'd even done multiple moves to my specific building in the past and just spoke with the doorman to confirm what we were about to do. As the sun was going down, these two guys got my stuff out of the van, into the building, up the service elevator, and into my room in my apartment with lightning speed. I wished I'd had a timer going because it was beyond impressive. Seriously, I think from the time we got to the building to the time they were done was less than a half hour. And they went fast, but they were by no means careless. Somehow, my LifeStraw glass water pitcher broke during the process, and I can tell you that this doesn't happen often because the one who said he did it, by accident of course, felt so bad about it that he insisted on personally replacing it through his own Amazon account. Since I had the LifeStraw in the box still, he was able to look up the item, had me confirm what it was and my address, and he followed up a couple days later to make sure it had arrived like his account said. I was really grateful because it's the best water pitcher I've had to date. Actually, it's right there. And with all the other unexpected expenses I was racking up, replacing this item was just not going to happen without his generosity. I'd set aside a certain amount of cash for a tip, but after the experience they provided, I literally gave them the rest of the cash I had in my wallet too. I was just so grateful. With all the stuff in my room, I had successfully moved my life from one place to another, minus the frozen food I forgot and had to go back for the next day. I made space for a sleeping bag I bought the day before. Again, my last place was furnished and I didn't have a mattress yet. I only have a little bit of experience with sleeping bags, but this is definitely the best one I've had so far. It's a Coleman 50-degree sleeping bag I got on sale at Target, and it's pretty cozy, but the floor was hard and my back felt it all night. For about 10 nights. Part of the reason I didn't want to buy the mattress off the previous occupant is that I've had back and neck ache issues for many years at this point. So I realized that this was the right time for me to invest in my back and neck health. I did a lot of research on my own to figure out what types of mattresses would probably work for me, and it turns out that there are a lot more factors than just sleeping position. I felt firmly, mattress jokes, about not buying a mattress without testing it out. I know it's becoming more and more popular to buy mattresses in a box online, but I just knew this wasn't a good idea for me. It would be too risky to get it wrong, when at this point I'd had enough painful experiences on mattresses to know that I needed something specific. Your first thought is probably stores like Mattress Firm and Macy's, and nothing wrong with that. I picked out my mattress at my parents' house from Mattress Firm. But when I did research, I started discovering a handful of brands not featured in these stores. And the two specific mattresses I wanted to test were only located at one store in all of New York City, Sleepair. This discovery was the greatest. Sleepair is a mattress showroom with a few locations sprinkled around the country. It carries some of the top online mattress brands. I was able to go in, and to my surprise, neither of the mattresses I went in to test were what I walked out with. The manager was informative and helped guide me to an educated decision. Even though I walked in with more knowledge than the average customer, she taught me even more. I also felt comfortable there to take the time I truly needed to lay on these mattresses to evaluate. It wasn't awkward. After taking me around to some different mattresses and having discussions with me about them, she left me to patiently wait and see how my back felt, just checking on me periodically if I needed anything. Because the thing is, it's hard to get a feel after just 10 minutes of laying on a mattress, so I really gave my back the time. Also, the atmosphere doesn't feel like a doctor's office. It's calming and aesthetic. I was there for well over an hour. The thing is, you don't want to rush into a decision like this or get it wrong. Of course, they have very accommodating ways to handle situations when the mattress ends up not being a fit, but honestly, it's still a hassle, and then you have to start over. Plus, it's a big financial investment and time commitment if you get a good one. At the same time, I also got a pillow that would be healthy for my neck because after learning about sleep alignment, I've been very unkind to my neck for years. And let me tell you, it's such a contrast to go from back pain every night to feeling comfortable as I fall asleep. If you've ever mattress shopped, you know that it takes time, and I simply didn't have it before the move, which of course would have been ideal so that my mattress would have arrived at the same time I did. But because of the way my April played out, even though sleeping on the ground was really tough, I don't feel like I would change anything because I truly did the best I could with the time I had. So I just patiently waited for my mattress to arrive in the mail while I slept on a sleeping bag on the floor. At this point, I wouldn't blame you if you're scratching your head about how can I stomach so many unexpected expenses in such a short period of time. I think it's a good time to touch on the importance of an emergency fund. In college, I went through Financial Peace University, which is Dave Ramsey's program for getting financially fit. He teaches about the importance of having an emergency fund to deal with the unexpected. For the first time, I had to use a significant portion of mine. We could talk about this more in another video if you want, and if so, let me know in a comment below. But for now, I'm gonna just leave it there and say that I'm working on paying my emergency fund back. Although move-in day was May 1st, it took me a couple weeks to get everything set up and organized. Most of May can be summarized by 1. Moving-related tasks, 2. Tutoring. May is a high time for my business because of final exams, and 3. A few fun social experiences sprinkled in. I don't have much to say on the first two, but to balance this video out a bit because it's evident that I had more hardship than ease during this time period, I'd like to tell you about a few of the good times. On the first weekend, I went to a diner and saw The Little Prince, which was a Broadway special, with a friend here in New York City who happened to have comp tickets. It wasn't my favorite show, but it was neat to see something so different. It was a breathtaking ballet. After everything I'd gone through, spending some time with a friend was really nice. The next weekend, I spent some time with my aunt and cousins, the same ones who were up here last summer, while they were here for a quick trip. And on the night of the 18th, Sam came to town for about 4.5 days. We walked around the South Street Seaport District, which I made a video about for Havas New York. We went plant shopping, we hung my desk bulletin board. Nailed it. We got desserts, Levain cookies, and I made us delicious French toast every day. The highlight of that visit was seeing the live taping of Late Night with Seth Meyers at NBC Studios. Seth Meyers was so personable with the audience. I know everyone has their persona when they're on stage, on front of a camera, or in front of an audience in any capacity, really. Like even now, I'm being super real with you, but this is still within the bounds of my on-camera persona. But at the same time, you can still get a feel for people. Like this is my on-camera persona, but I'm still being real, it's still me. And Seth Meyers just came off as a very genuinely good person. And honestly, someday I'd love to meet him for real. Not for an autograph, but like for him to know me too, as in two people truly meeting each other. Anyway, the show was a lot of fun, and if seeing live tapings is up your alley, you have to reserve it ahead of time, but it's free. But also do your homework on when you need to be there and run times, because these experiences can be a bit time consuming. I also met up with a friend and her dog at Central Park one day, which was honestly really nice. I needed some pet therapy after having felt kind of off mentally and emotionally that weekend. And that brings us to June. I've had some light tutoring this month, but I would say it's my slowest month of the entire year. It's also been just the right time for tutoring to be slow because Sam came for a couple days, and the reason he was here for 2 short trips so close together is that he had an international trip between them and flew through JFK, and my sister came for a visit. While Sam was here, we hung up canvas prints I ordered to decorate my room, walked around and ate at a local food festival, and we went to see the live taping of The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Also a neat experience. And of course, we had chill time too. Between visits, I replaced my makeup essentials because I knew I'd want to start filming videos again, and wearing makeup when I film is really important to me. Sooner than a week after Sam left, Leia arrived. We had so much fun. Our top activity was definitely jewelry and secondhand shopping. I mean, we hit practically every secondhand store in Lower Manhattan. It's such an affordable, eco-friendly way to shop. Plus, we love the treasure hunt feel of it all. Some of the top places we hit were Crossroads, Buffalo Exchange, 2nd Street, which is the name of a similar set of stores, and Goodwill. We went to multiple locations and a few other spots I didn't mention just now, but wow, the deals we found were incredible. A few examples of the kinds of deals we found were these Lululemon shorts for $18, these practically new Asics for $10, and this wool silk blend Vince top that desperately needs to be dry cleaned for $9. Another thing, Leia's been gluten-free since 2014, and although it's something that now everybody knows about and there are full grocery store sections with gluten-free accommodations, it's not like every restaurant and every place you go is gluten-free friendly. So she, and I for that matter, were really excited to eat a couple gluten-free things here. Of course, we had to get pizza while she was in New York City, and I found this place in Nolita that online articles said was amazing. It's called Ruby Rosa, and it even had a full gluten-free menu, and when Leia saw it, she got really excited because apparently this was her first sighting of gluten-free mozzarella sticks since she's been gluten-free. So of course we had to try them, and they were so good. We also got another treat that she hadn't had since her gluten-free life began, a cinnamon roll. Erin McKenna is a baker I've mentioned multiple times on this channel before, and here I'm talking about it again because it's free of so many allergens, including gluten, wheat, dairy, eggs, soy, and nuts, aside from coconut. And I talked more about it in part 1 of the series, so you already have the inside scoop, and if you haven't seen part 1, you can check that out after this video, hear about where the story began. Your takeaway from this is that New York City has just about everything when it comes to food options. Leia and I saw Mr. Saturday Night, which is a show I really wanted to see because it's Billy Crystal's Broadway debut, and whether it's a limited run show or they'll have subsequent casts, I wanted to see this one starring Billy Crystal himself. This was my first time ever seeing an original cast of a Broadway show, and it was a great one. Really funny, great songs, 5 of which I've been listening and singing to since then, and it's wild to think that we were so close to Billy Crystal. I mean, he was right there. Also, such an inspiration. He's 74, you know. I'll leave the link in the description to a neat interview I watched before we saw it. I don't really want you to leave my channel because I want you to stick around and watch the next video. You'll understand that more if you see the play. But I'm your friend, and friends share links to good content. So hopefully, if you watch that interview, you'll remember who sent you there. Anyway, we spent our evenings looking through our secondhand finds from each day, planning the next day, and just relaxing. We love watching Full House reruns together, so we had that on in the background for most of the time too. Taking a step back and looking at the past few months, obviously with all of the interruptions, Sam coming to visit, me going to DC, my parents coming to visit, moving, Sam coming to visit, Sam coming to visit again, Leia coming to visit, I couldn't get into a routine, let alone sustain it. So that's why you haven't really seen much content from me lately. In May and June, during the in-between periods, I chose to focus a lot on the behind-the-scenes business setup work. Because what you see here is just the front of something bigger. As a creator, I'm making videos and putting myself out there, but as an entrepreneur, I'm also building into a media business with long-term potential. And that's a whole nother discussion, but here's some overview information to give you a flavor of what it was like. It's a lot of work, and even with my resourcefulness when it comes to research, I still shed a few tears during some frustrated, confusing moments. This isn't the kind of stuff to mess up, and I don't really have a mentor yet. Obviously, based on my demeanor now, you can tell I got through it. Some of the highlights, or achievements we could say, were officially forming as an LLC in the state of New York, meeting the New York State publication requirements for new businesses, meaning my business was mentioned in a couple local newspapers, lucking into an awesome banker who believes in me and is now my direct point of contact, opening a business checking account and getting a debit card, applying for and receiving a business credit card, building a website from scratch and feeling proud of my finished product. And about that last one, this was my 5th website I've made in my life, and the very first one I feel truly proud of. It's also the first website I built using Squarespace, and it made a huge difference. I'm not a professional web designer, and I definitely did a better time finding inspiration for my website this time than in past attempts, but still, I'm thinking that Squarespace might have something to do with it, so I highly recommend Squarespace if you need something easy yet professional. And I have to say, it feels really good to have listed all those accomplishments out for you, because I'm really hard on myself when it comes to productivity and efficiency, especially because all the work falls on me. And believe it or not, that list wasn't me reaching my goals for what I've completed. I had bigger goals for what I was gonna do, but upon reflection, it actually sounds like a lot. In fact, this whole year sounds like a lot. I had no idea when I sat down to write the narrative that it would take over 4 days to complete. And before I sat down to write this, I realized that something really unusual happened over the course of my first year in New York City. And here's what it is. If you ask someone to tell the story of the past year they've lived, most likely it's gonna sound like a summarized diary, a succession of events that happened. I mean, that's how it would have been for me in the past, but these past 365 days, the story of my first year in New York City actually follows the traditional structure of a narrative arc. Beginning of the story, I didn't have a place to live in New York City. There's the setup of the problem in this story. Pet sitting, flying to and from Houston, apartment hunting, first time, moving into my co-living apartment, still flying across the country. This was all part of the rising action related to being unsettled. Receiving the news of my new home being ripped out from under me was the climax, the absolute most painful part of the story and the worst moment in it. Apartment hunting, moving, and everything that comes with moving and getting settled in my new place, these were all part of the falling action. And finally, the conclusion. That's where I am right now. I'll circle back to it in a minute. Of course, I shared all about the other things that happened in my life throughout the year because, as amazing as it is that I experienced a full narrative over the course of a year, it was also real life, which means there is an inevitably diary-like quality to it. And also, the story of finding a home in New York City is the big one, but of course there were smaller story arcs within the story, which is also commonplace and natural in longer stories. Now, even though I'm about to share the conclusion of the story, this isn't where it ends. Stick around until after the conclusion to find out what you haven't heard about all this yet. So, what's the conclusion, you ask? This! Today, the day I'm filming is July 2nd, the second day of my second year in New York City, and I'm finally settled. I have a comfortable place to call my own and enjoy every single day. I have dreams turned goals that I finally have the stability I've needed to gain momentum on them. All interruptions caused setbacks. So, the story of my second year in New York City is going to have a lot to do with the boom of my media business. You can check back in with me a year from now to see that I'm right. But we're not actually done with the story. I know, you're probably thinking you've been here forever, so what could possibly be left? If I've done a good enough job keeping you engaged in the story, you may not have realized that that's all we talked about. For some people, reflections and lessons are where the real juice is at, because my story is just that, a story. To me and the people closest to me, it was real, but unless you're one of the 4 to 6 people who are really dialed in, the videos about what I experienced were really just entertainment. I was curing you of your curiosity about what my experience was really like, or maybe you just wanted to know what the experience was like for someone, or maybe you yourself were thinking about embarking on an adventure like mine and want to know how to do it. But if you want to know how I changed from all of this, because I'm still standing after all this time, you're going to need to watch the next, and yes, the last, video in this series, which is a reflection upon the lessons and growth I gleaned from all of this. Before you head over there, please kindly give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications, and go ahead and follow me on Instagram to find out what's going on in real time. Thank you so much for watching. Seriously, I'm gonna assume that you just finished watching all 3 videos of my story, and even if you just made it through this one video, that's amazing too. It was not a short video. In fact, I think it might be the longest video I've ever produced. We'll see. The fact that you take enough interest in me and my story to spend this much time on it is a huge compliment, and I recognize that. So I'd love to know who you are if you watched the whole series. You can drop a comment with the secret words, "You made it!" saying to me like, "Yay, I made it through the year," or you can say, "I made it!" as in you made it through all 3 videos. And if you're close enough in my personal life to have my phone number, text me and tell me. I promise it will not be awkward. Thank you so much again from the bottom of my heart, and I will see you again in part 4 in the next video.